Please give a round of applause to Mr. Fred Krupp and Mr. Anderson Cooper.
Thanks so much for doing this. We appreciate it.
Honored to be here.
Yeah, we kind of look identical, which is a little strange talking to you. If you were wearing glasses, it would be exactly the same. You could fill in for me, actually. I could take a vacation. First of all, let's talk about what the Environmental Defense Fund is actually doing in Puerto Rico and plans to do regarding low-carbon microgrids.
Well, our goal is to support communities in Puerto Rico that want to interconnect with the grid with their own microgrid that will allow the lights to go on after the hurricane.
How does a microgrid work? I mean, what is the benefit of it? Obviously, it localizes power, it gives power to people kind of in more of their control, but it can also unplug from any central power source in the event of a storm.
Exactly right. It gives you what in Malu's report, Re-envisioning Puerto Rico, they called location diversity. And what that allows is by distributing resources around the island, near to where the people using the power are, they can generate their own power. They can still be connected into the grid, but in times of catastrophe, they're allowed to isolate themselves and generate their own power, if not for all of their needs, at least for their critical needs to continue. You know, Anderson, it's just completely unacceptable that the hurricane struck and for 7 months, 10% of the island was still out of power. Hundreds of thousands of people. The deaths that were caused after the hurricane, thousands of people. The response of the federal government was unconscionable, as you documented. But there's an opportunity here to be more prepared for the next storm, which unfortunately, sadly, we know will continue to come.
You know, I mean, you mentioned the deaths, and I think it's important to remember all the lives that were lost, not only during the storm, but in the months afterward, and also the lack of transparency in acknowledging the true toll of the storm, both from the federal government and others. That lack of transparency, I mean, if you're willing to, you know, keep the death toll number artificially low for months and months, even though you know it's higher, and you make it difficult for, you know, students from the University of Puerto Rico and elsewhere in Harvard to do studies on it, you can only imagine what the lack of transparency in the energy sector translates into.
Well, exactly. Sunshine is the best disinfectant for all of these issues. Getting the data out there allows good decisions to be made. So we've had great conversation this morning about the terrific bipartisan leadership from Senators Salheimer and Bhatia in the new bill, which is a tremendous step forward. I'd love to see that same bipartisan leadership in Washington on this issue.
Yeah, good luck.
You know, it's just beginning to emerge, the glimmers of Joe Manchin and Lisa Murkowski holding joint hearings on climate change. Just beginning to emerge. It'll take a few years.
You also have something called the Investor Confidence Project, and since there was a discussion about investors and the role they should play, can you just describe what that is?
Yes, what basically we need to have clear rules so investors can have confidence that there is an investment to be made. And
they've got to have faith that it's not going to disappear.
Exactly. So there's a lot of money right now. Climate change is an enormous problem. As you know, as you've reported on, we've seen storms not only here, hurricanes not only here, but Harvey and Sandy and the wildfires. But the flip side of that is that there's an enormous opportunity. Businesses that have been created in our country are usually led by entrepreneurs who can see around the corner and anticipate change and figure out ways to serve what people want. In this case, it's impossible to believe that people are going to stand by as we continue to pollute our atmosphere and cause stronger and stronger storms. You can bet on that. It's a very cynical bet. I think smart money is going to bet on the fact that people are going to want electric cars, clean energy, solar power, battery storage. The Investor Confidence Project is all about making energy efficiency investments ones that can be invested in with common metrics so that we know as there's payback, that payback can be shared by the consumer and others.
A market-based kind of global standard, I think, is what EDF calls it.
Yes. And in this case, in Puerto Rico, as Mr. Rossi just said, the law is great. As he pointed out, now we need the regulations. The regulations create the certainty so that there are investment opportunities. Yesterday, Anderson, I had the good fortune, I was honored to go to the community of San Salvador. They have had this vision since the power has been going out repeatedly, even before Maria, that they would like to create microgrids in their community. After Maria, the planning really ramped up, and they're at the stage where they want to create a pilot with 8 homes, and ultimately the whole community, 800 homes. Until there are rules about how to interconnect, they can't interconnect with a grid. So this project right now is stopped.
One of the first speakers expressed some skepticism about, kind of boutique projects of microgrids in a town, and it looks good and everyone likes it, but scaling it up, and there's been concern just from our last guest, scaling it up, getting it out there, it's not easy. I mean, it seems like it's very far away.
It's not so far away. What we need, what prevents it from happening, is the lack of the rules. And one of the good things...
The lack of rules.
The lack of rules. So this bill needs to pass on Monday, and then they're...
Do you think it will?
I've been informed by the senators that they expect it will. They know far more than I do. But then we need the regulations, and the regulations need to say what are the technical requirements to hook up the microgrid. And once that happens, yes, we'll first need to have 1 or 2 or 3 communities showing the way, and then I think you will see it scale up. It's not the only thing that needs to happen. In addition to these microgrids, we need to have a very open, Mr. Rossi used the word transparent process. The data needs to be available. If there's a mandate for renewables by 2025, as there will be in the new bill, there needs to be an open bidding process that can be seen by the public. What is in the bids? What is the cost in the bids? What are all the provisions?
How long is the contract?
How long is the contract? One thing that I have questions about in the repowering of units 5 and 6 here in San Juan is the bids were all secret and sealed. And the data, sunshine again is the best disinfectant, and only when you have the data available can the public truly participate. So the call for participation is great, but as the people in Puerto Rico look to what is the best future to create, how much renewables, the question on the last panel, how fast can we get there? The only way to answer those questions is with data that is now secret. How much power is being used? Where is it being used on the island? What times of day is it being used? Once that data is available...
so the government here is keeping that secret?
It is not available, whether it's PREPA or the government. I can say that information has to be available for the groups that you've seen on stage to model what the alternative scenarios
I go back
are.
to the horrific death toll. I think CNN, among others, actually ended up having to sue in order to get access to data that the government had on actual fatalities. So the idea that it's not just in that realm that data is not available, data is being held onto that's critical for transparency.
Yes, and as the technology, the good news here, I mean, climate change is obviously a horrendous story. We have on the bestseller list now for the last 18 weeks the Earth, which paints a very grim picture. No one in Puerto Rico needs to read it because, sadly, they've seen it. They've lived through it. And now, increasingly, the wildfires in California, around the country, more and more people have lived through it. Having said that, there is an opportunity to rebuild in a way that not only the bipartisan leadership of the two senators can show the way, but Puerto Rico can show the way that we can have a more resilient, cleaner system, self-healing in a way, having these local grids being able to isolate themselves so the whole island isn't blacked out for months.
So the first step, there's obviously getting bills passed, getting laws passed, rules changed. Then what is the next actual practical step? I mean, 1121 passes, then what? I know you have this model. You're going to be doing it, I think, in one community, the low carbon microgrids with local people as well. What else? What happens then?
The writing of the rules will not be will take months, even years, but the critical rules need to be developed first. And then we need the demonstration projects, the showcases that scale. And EDF is here to help not just one community, but whatever communities want our help. And there needs to be this process that there's open and competitive bidding for the renewables.
Joseph,
all of that data needs to be available.
I want to talk about climate change in a minute, but Josen raised, I think, an important point, which is that it's not just political will. It is political will, but in order to get the political will, there has to be buy-in from local communities. There has to be pressure from people in this room, from people all across Puerto Rico to make this happen.
No question.
What does climate change mean for Puerto Rico specifically?
Well, because Puerto Rico is an island, the rising sea level, which could rise several feet in the next century, is something that we need to both prepare for and prevent by reducing emissions. So we need both Puerto Rico to be part of the worldwide effort to reduce emissions, to do their part, as was said earlier, but we also need to prepare for the climate change, the amount that's already in the bank. And that will mean not only rising sea level, but also increasingly strong hurricanes. One thing that is known is that as the oceans warm, it adds force to the hurricanes. So it doesn't necessarily create more hurricanes, but the hurricanes that hit have stronger and more devastating winds. So, those are the implications on the downside. The upside is that because Puerto Rico is an island, solar power, wind power are all actually more affordable here. Because importing natural gas, as was said on the previous panel, is more expensive here than it would be in Florida or Arkansas. You have to either compress it or liquefy it. There's cost to that. And that means Puerto Rico can be in the vanguard, along with Hawaii, on demonstrating that new systems that are more resilient can be created.
Ruth, in the last panel, was raising concerns and dislike of natural gas. And for the Environmental Defense Fund, do you see that as a necessary transition?
Well, I think that in some circumstances, yes, we will need natural gas. But natural gas needs to be cleaned up because it not only is a fossil fuel that burns cleaner than oil, but a lot of it is escaping into the atmosphere unburned as methane. And it turns out methane is far more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, 84 times more powerful than carbon dioxide pound for pound. And the EPA was, even in the Obama administration, underestimating by 60% how much was escaping. This is a worldwide problem, Anderson, and it's a worldwide opportunity to make natural gas cleaner. The Environmental Defense Fund is actually designing and building a satellite that will put into low Earth orbit that will monitor, or as President Reagan used to say, trust but verify.
Are you the only environmental group that has a satellite? I haven't heard of any. Or are going to have a satellite.
I think so, Anderson, but luckily we have a fellow named Tom Ingersoll who knows what he's doing.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah.
He was the CEO of 2 satellite companies, and so this project is really exciting.
You know, you were involved in Hawaii in the what went on there. I'm just wondering what you learned from that experience, and if you could just talk about what you saw there.
Well, I think you know, Hawaii is a leader, and one thing we've seen there is that they have integrated all the things that you need to do, whether it's increasing renewables, energy efficiency, valuing distributed energy. So their regulatory system that is a few years ahead of Puerto Rico has been constructed in a very thoughtful way.
Is that the best model that Puerto Rico can look at? That actually, I mean, an actual working model?
I think Puerto Rico should and is borrowing from the best all over the country and the world. I think the process that's gone on to create this bill has been, you know, shown tremendous leadership. In New York, we have the reforming the energy vision process, which has been important. In Brooklyn, there's the example that was referred to earlier of instead of building a new transmission line and importing those resources, which would have cost $1.2 billion, by having the distributed resources in Brooklyn, the cost will be $200 million. So the ratepayers who end up getting stuck paying for whatever the costs are protected by going to this distributed system. In New Jersey, we were involved in creating a transit microgrid that we saw the need after Hurricane Sandy, when the transit systems were knocked out, to have a microgrid that would at least keep the trains running. And so we've done there. So I think all of these experiences Puerto Rico can and is learning from.
The investor component of it, I mean, what do you say to potential investors who are looking at Puerto Rico, who are looking at microgrids, just in terms of the economics of it? How does that actually work?
Well, the rules are yet to be written, but to achieve...
I mean, how should it work?
Well, there should be, in my view, you know, clear rules that guarantee a return for investors. I like the comments earlier about at utility cost of capital, but the rules need to, you know, create certainty. But then the opportunity is enormous because the legislation requires us in Puerto Rico ramping up to 40 and 60 and 100% renewables. That's going to create, if implemented properly and if implemented, which I believe it will be, enormous numbers of jobs and enormous economic opportunity. So it's the next step is just getting these rules clear.
Generating jobs in what? In building grids? What are the jobs that it's generating?
Well, in building grids and installing solar panels and installing the wind systems, as electric vehicles, which is an important opportunity, take hold here as in the rest of the United States, building the charging stations.
Well, isn't all that stuff just as vulnerable to hurricanes as, you know, the current system?
No.
The solar panels themselves, the microgrids?
No. There is, of course, vulnerabilities of everything to hurricanes. That I agree with. But yesterday in San Salvador, I learned about how they are learning from the hurricanes, installing the solar panels only on the roofs that are, you know, structurally sound, that have been rebuilt or were undamaged in the hurricane, how they bolt them down, how, you know, you can create something that anticipates the winds that are foreseeable. Now, At some point, anything can go, 200-mile-an-hour
Sure.
winds, but short of that, it can be planned for. And the whole beauty of the concept of the microgrid is that when the system goes, if your system is still intact, you can still have power. And while that can work for an individual home or an individual business, it can work for a whole community. And these community-level microgrids are really, in my view, what's so exciting about what's bubbling up now from communities around the island, that they see there is safety in numbers and in having the whole community protected in this way. And after the hurricane, people who had solar panels, because of the rules and the lack of inverters, that you were unable to have electricity even though you had a solar panel on your roof generating electricity.
And they store the power. I mean, they're not just generating power in real time. They store power up as well. So,
Well, you need batteries too. And an exciting thing in Hawaii, David, who spoke on one of the last panels, they have just issued a contract for new photovoltaics in Kauai at 11 cents a kilowatt hour for not only the panels but also the batteries. So the fact that the price of panels has been dropping from over $1 a kilowatt to now pennies, and even with storage combined, this is an enormous opportunity.
there is skepticism about future governments levying a tax on it, or I mean, senators were talking about changing laws that guarantee no tax. But is that something we've seen happen elsewhere?
We have seen elsewhere the net metering become controversial when the penetration of solar exceeds a certain percent, and there are equity issues there. One of the good things about the bill that we hope gets passed on Monday is that it anticipates that after the first 5 years there will need to be changes, but it will grandfather in those who participate in the first 5 years, so their expectations will be solid, and then there will need to be a change in the rate structure based on what fairness requires.
It's certainly easy, I think, for people to be skeptical about, the road ahead, getting to 2050 of 100% renewables. You've been working in this for, what, 30 plus years? You started in Connecticut in a small group?
That's true.
I'm not dating you, but I'm just, I don't want to, but how do you, how do you remain optimistic about, because, the trend line has not been a good one, and certainly for the last 2 years, from, I assume from the, an environmental standpoint, you can't be thrilled about who's running the EPA, about obviously a lot of the political messaging coming out of Washington. I mean, how do you remain optimistic? What is your message to Puerto Ricans about pushing forward?
Anderson, can't be thrilled about what's coming out of Washington is a rather large understatement.
I'm prone to understatement. It's
The Trump administration has been disastrous for the environmental regulations. They have systematically gone after and attacked every protection we have. Luckily, we and our allies in the environmental community have, and the states have litigated, and very little of the Trump administration agenda has actually been accomplished, gotten through the court challenges. But the question of how to remain optimistic is, what is the choice? Do people in the room, are you going to throw in the towel? Yes, climate change is a very serious threat to human well-being and the economy, but it also is an opportunity for us to arise above partisanship and make a difference. In the last 6 months, Anderson, my wife who's here with me today and I were lucky enough to have 2 grandchildren born. And for me, it's just given 2 more reasons in addition to all the grandchildren here and to be born, to say this is a fight, creating a future that is resilient and healthy, creating prosperity from all the jobs to build that future. This is a fight that is worth spending every day on, and absolutely worth being optimistic about, because it's unbelievable that we humans will do this to ourselves. We will rise above this.
Just finally, I'm wondering, we just have a couple minutes left. What do you want to leave the people who are here this afternoon with?
Well, the messages that have already been delivered, I think, have been a tremendous amount of wisdom and insight. The need now for all stakeholders to participate in translating this law into action through the regulations. There's a huge need now to not say, oh, the law is passed, the job is done, but to continue to engage. That would be number one. Number two would be there is a need for the data and information to be made public and available to all. Only if the data is freely available in Puerto Rico about who is using electricity, when and how much, by geography, not by individual
What is the
customer.
argument used to not release the data on energy usage?
I can't imagine a valid one. I think it's basic that in order to model what is possible and for the public to participate constructively, which is much better than any other way, you can't shoulder the burden to create scenarios unless you have the data.
And does it boil down to the governor, or is it one person who makes that decision to release data?
Right now, PREPA has the data. They need to release it, and how that's going to happen, I don't know, but I know it needs to happen, and that will allow people in Puerto Rico to be equipped to be part of this process and make better decisions for their future.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anderson.
It's a pleasure.